Right, hello, it's David Clifton here. Can those of you who are on my panel seeing a screen, can you see that we are live, please?
Yes, we are live.
Well, That's jolly good to hear, and so my apologies to my panelists and those who may be watching at the moment, but I'm afraid a technical issue means that both I and Martin Litschke are both dialing in, so you will not have the pleasure of seeing us, but you have the pleasure of the view of the other panelists. So welcome everybody to this session, Ethical Gambling Spotlight on Governance. I'm David Clifton, Director at Clifton Davis Consultancy. And the other invisible panelist is Martin Litschke, Director of Regulatory Affairs at GVC. Just say hello, Martin, so we know you're there.
I'm still here. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me. And apologies from me as well.
Thanks, Martin. And we have Katie Hardman, Director of Legal and Regular Affairs at European Gaming and Betting Association. Katie, you're there with us?
Yes, I'm here and I can hear you well, David. Thank you.
Jolly good. Thank you. And Daniela Johansson, Chief Responsibility Officer at... Now, Daniela, is it PAF or is it PAF? I want to get this right. Which is it?
So it's PAF.
PAF, that's right. Jolly good. Well, welcome, Daniela. And also, last but by no means least, Sandhya Singh, Head of Risk and Fraud, Payment and Customer Services at Napoleon Sports and Casino. Hello, Sandhya.
Hi, David. Hi, everyone.
Hi. Well, jolly good. Now, first of all, what I'm going to do is just do a short introductory chat before we get into this particular topic. And I think one only has to look at what's happened to the reputation of gambling operators across various parts of Europe in recent years to recognize some of the reasons why public media and political perception of the industry has diminished as far as it has, very sadly. In some cases, it's been the content and the sheer volume of gambling advertising that has turned the tide of public opinion against the industry. In other cases, well, I suppose it's been a series of high-profile AML, social responsibility and customer interaction failings by gambling operators, certainly here in the UK, that have resulted in ever-increasing financial penalties being imposed. And the recent record UK fine earlier this year was £13 million to make failings in government arrangements. Of course, we've seen, I think it was Monday, wasn't it, this week, the Swedish Administrative Court of Appeal's decision to uphold revocation by the Swedish gambling regulator of the license held by Ninja casino operator Global Gaming. And there are examples in other jurisdictions around Europe, so it's not just the UK, and indeed, for that matter, it's not just Sweden. But in all cases, the unsatisfactory outcome in many ways is that certain sections of the media given ammunition to latch on to every story of personal tragedy that arises from gambling-related harm, and every example of an industry increasingly perceived to be putting company profits ahead of customer safety. Now, we know that is not the case in all instances, or indeed in most instances. But nevertheless, the message gets across through the media to the public, to the politicians, and in the UK, for the first time ever, each one of the four major political parties had gambling reform listed as a key factor within their general election manifestos at the end of last year. We've never seen that before. It seems inevitable, too, that the online gambling sector is going to have considerably greater regulatory restrictions imposed on it when the forthcoming UK government review of gambling legislation here in the UK is determined. And from what I've been reading, it looks like that's the same way that Dutch player protection rules are headed, with much greater restrictions. So it's against this background that a large proportion of my own work in recent years has been taken up with advising betting and gaming industry clients, both remote and non-remote, on fundamental reappraisals of and improvements to their governance frameworks. Now, why is that important? Here in the UK, the Gambling Commission has summed it up in these words: those operators that demonstrate good governance and a high level of compliance at all levels are less likely to present a risk to the licensing objectives and will receive less regulatory oversight as a result. So there is a clear message about the importance of governance. But what is it? What is governance? At its most simplistic, it's a set of rules, practices, and processes by which companies are governed. But what I want to do now is to drill deeper with each of our panelists to address the question that's effectively posed in the conference agenda. Can new governance implement effective change, promoting as a sustainable sector? So that's the issue that we're going to be addressing for the next 35 minutes or so. So first of all, but we focus on the title of this session, what is ethical gambling? And what is its relevance to in the conference and implemented in promoting gambling as a sustainable sector? So I'm going to please, from each of you, I'm going to go with my other invisible person first. Martin, what is ethical gambling?
Good afternoon again, everybody. Thanks for having me, and I apologize again for being invisible. So you only get the dubious pleasure of listening to my rather crackling voice. Nonetheless, I will do my best to answer David's first question, and thanks, David, for the very pertinent and spot-on introduction to the panel. In my view, ethical gambling these days, and we have all learned many lessons from the past, is at the very heart of the DNA of this sector. It may not appear to some from a number of press articles, but in my view, the industry has, over the last 2, 3, perhaps even 4 years these days, gone through a massive transformation. And perhaps to pick up on your point about governance being a set of rules, yes, indeed, the foundations of any governance processes are represented and reflected by and in a set of rules. But in my view, it needs to and does go beyond that. These are meant to be the standards that the industry, and this is in my view certainly the case of GVCs, needs to live and die by, not only because it's been prescribed to us by a variety of regulators of ours, not only because it's the right thing to do, but crucially because this is the only way how we can ascertain the long-term sustainability of the industry. Many companies within this space are, of course, listed at a number of stock exchanges, so a number, needless to say, number of governance rules follow from that. I've just mentioned licenses. Most companies, big companies in this sector, are licensed in 20 plus jurisdictions, plus in most cases a number of US territories. So there's a whole raft of rules that we have to comply with, and perhaps contrary to public perception, we are largely happy to comply with these rules. We could be spending hours and hours discussing the nitty-gritty of some of them that we perhaps do not find, call it business-orientated, industry-friendly, or even practical. But brushing that aside, I've talked about the transformation, so that lies, all this lies at the core, at the heart of the transformation, from being largely unregulated businesses, even some 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago, to becoming these giant behemoths that have to respect all these rules. And once we've realized, now but if we have realized all this, then we will have built a very, very solid platform for going forward along the lines of being ethical businesses, ethical gambling businesses. But I reckon in this respect, gambling industry or gambling industry businesses are businesses like any other businesses that need to have ethics and responsibility, crucially responsibility related to the social ills gambling may generate, permanently at the back of their mind and at the very heart of all their operations.
Martin, thank you, and that's an extremely effective summary. Daniela, let me come to you. Perhaps I'm going to suggest has a somewhat unique, perhaps, certainly different ethical approach to gambling. One of its straplines, sustainable business growth and only happy players. So just give us a little introduction to PAF's approach to ethical gaming.
Absolutely, David. And I think to do that, I will just look a bit at the history of PAF. So we were founded a bit more than 50 years ago by a number of charity organizations, Red Cross, Save the Children, as an example. And this kind of sets the foundation for our business. It also means that the profit that PAF makes will go to the benefits of the society. So every year the profit will then go to the third sector of the society. And this kind of sets the basics for how we at PAF thinks regarding our business. I mean, it's the foundation to do it in a sustainable way and being kind of leading in the field of governance and responsibility. And this is very important for us. And during these 50 years, I mean, it has been a journey, I have to say. And if you look at the gaming industry the last couple of years, I think that we have taken a lot of steps as an industry. But still, I think there is a long way to go. And for PAF and with our background, we see it also as our mission to kind of help to drive the industry forward and trying to also take initiatives that are not like mandatory, but where we really try to push the sustainability efforts forward. And basically, I mean, the main...
I was going to say, I'll come on to that in a moment, in learning a little bit more about what PAF does differently. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. That was my problem with not seeing you. By all means, finish.
Yes.
Sorry, Daniela, do you have anything else to add at the moment, or shall we come back to that in just a moment?
We can come back to that. Sorry, David, I really didn't catch your last question, so sorry, it was a bit of a bad line.
No, I'm so sorry. We'll come back to you in just a moment. Can I ask Sandhya what your answer is to the question, what is ethical gambling?
So, sorry. Yeah. Hi, all. So, in addition to what Martin mentioned, because most of the things Martin mentioned are applicable for us as well as an operator. So, I work for Napoleon Sports and Casino in Belgium. So, for me, it's very, very clear that yes, there are a set of regulations which are to be followed or which are there. But for me, if I'm a customer and I go and play on some website, I need to feel protected. I need to feel a fair gambling play. I need to feel that, there are procedures and processes in place which will serve, which will help me as a customer or which will support me as a customer to take different measures. So it's the same thing I want each of my Napoleon customer to feel, that when they are on our website, they should see all procedures, or they should know that we have all the procedures in place and it's an absolutely ethical site that they are playing on. So we should have appropriately all settings, all measures in terms of responsible gambling, measures in terms of KYC procedures, and all the regulatory requirements in place. So that's what ethical gaming is for me.
Great, thank you for that. Katie, what is there to add from your perspective?
Thank you, David. Actually, I really liked your introduction because I think it covered quite well a lot of the challenges that we need to discuss today. I think we're quite at a crucial moment for the industry where every operator sort of needs to think how do we want to move the industry forward, because I think very often also the role of all operators is kind of overlooked, and very often we focus on kind of bigger operators, but we forget that kind of the image of the industry is something that gets cultivated by everyone. So whether someone behaves responsibly as an operator or whether they behave unresponsibly, it's ultimately going to really kind of affect everyone. So we as an industry need to really think how we're going to create this sustainability. How are we going to create a more kind of responsible image for the sector? Because for every kind of positive thing that the industry does, you have all this kind of, as you mentioned, all the stories in the media, which are very impactful, because individual stories are always very impactful. But we have to be very careful to think where we want to go. Do we want to go in the direction of accepting our responsibility, of saying we have a responsibility for our customers and we're going to be acting in a certain way, and we're going to work with compliance with regulation and work on self-regulation, and in that way kind of improve our working relationship, but also improve the image of the industry? Or are we just going to kind of try to have a mad race for customers, disregarding the rules, and ultimately end up like, let's say, like cigarettes? Because I think very often when I listen to conferences, I hear kind of the comparison between gambling and kind of other industries like alcohol or cigarettes, and where alcohol has succeeded. And I think Martin, our Secretary General, he very often likes to say, how can you imagine that Heineken, which is a beer, they sponsor Formula One? See, this is by taking responsibility and by being a responsible, serious player. And on the other hand, you have cigarettes that as a sector have not taken responsibility, and as a result have become more and more under regulatory pressure. So it's very, we need to walk our own path, but we also need to kind of consider how every single operator behaves and how we can all work together to kind of create a responsible, sustainable industry. And I think we'll elaborate on this in the next questions.
Great, Katie, thank you. And Martin, let me come back to you, and I'm going to pick up on something that Katie has just said, because GVC here in the UK, a leading member of the Betting and Gaming Council, together with other very large operators, all of whom are going to have fairly sophisticated, long-standing governance frameworks in place. So although I could be asking you, what is the governance framework at GVC, I'm going to slightly twist the question and say, think of smaller operators than GVC. What are the essentials that you can look at within a much larger organization's governance framework, and perhaps suggest these are the key checks and balances that need to be in place for a smaller operator? Is that something you could comment on?
I will certainly do my best. First of all, let me say that I believe that Katie has, just as always, hit the nail on the head, because it should be coming down to being prepared to assume responsibility. And I truly believe that that's what the industry has done. It might have taken us a bit longer than some would have liked, but we have definitely done that. And that's the critical element of ethical gambling, being prepared to assume responsibility and learn from the mistakes of the past. When it comes to the smaller, or let's call them mid-sized and sort of small-sized operators, indeed, I can imagine that they may perceive the task of being compliant with the whole raft of rules as rather challenging, if not daunting. And I would strongly suggest that that needs to be reflected in the assessment of their performance in this space, because these operators may not necessarily, unlike the big, not only UK-facing ones, global operators that you have alluded to, David, they may not have the resource, both people-wise and budget-wise. Despite that, most of them, or definitely a large majority of them, have been doing their very best to ensure compliance with the applicable standards. So when it comes to the elements, I've already mentioned the preparedness to play by the book, which requires some zeal, and at least back in the day did require a bit of a leap into the unknown, but we're definitely beyond that. So in terms of the practical tools, I would suggest that at the risk of stating the very obvious, every single company in this space, regardless of its size, does require to have very robust compliance, anti-money laundering, responsible gambling, anti-fraud, what have you, policies, programs, and processes, including implementation, because ultimately that is the springboard or the platform that serves to protect customers. And the other crucial element is, of course, the people. And when I say the people, it's the employees, it's also the external parties these businesses work with, and the people that are in the relevant teams in the business, be it compliance or responsible gambling, they need to be put through adequate training. But I would also suggest that these people do need to, and they genuinely do, show passion for their roles. So on the one hand, and that's what I mean by that, they do need to understand, I would suggest, that ultimately these businesses are here to make money. At the same time, they need to be prepared to be forceful enough to continuously explain to the colleagues that are perhaps more focused on revenue generation that the ethical side of the business needs to sit at the forefront of all the processes and all the thinking, all the business plans the individual companies will be putting out there and executing.
Thank you. Daniela, Martin just talking in terms of businesses being here to make money, plus everything else, of course, that he said. It seems to me, from what I've been finding out, has a very interesting approach to this. Clear mission to generate profit for the benefit of society, as you alluded to previously. Responsible gaming at the heart of everything you do. I called it earlier a unique business model. Is it? And do you want to just tell us a little bit more about it? Because I did rather rudely, I'm afraid, cut you off earlier. So please carry on as you were talking earlier.
Thank you, David. Absolutely. And regarding like these the things that the PAF now and the initiatives that we have taken, I mean, it has been, some of them have been quite bold, I would say. Our last initiative is regarding our yearly loss limit, where it means that we will have a hard cap on yearly losses for players of 25,000, and we will now also lower it to 20,000 euros then in 1st of January 2021. And we have got a lot of attention with this initiative. It was quite interesting when we released it in 2018, because on the gambling industry we got a lot of feedback that we are crazy because it's too low. But when you speak to like a random person on the street, they also think that we're crazy because it's too high. And I think that kind of shows the different perceptions. I mean, if you're in the gambling industry or if you're like a normal person, and how the view on the gambling industry is, I mean, when it comes to sustainability and if we are like a sustainable business. So I think that gap, I mean, we need to close. And I totally agree what was said earlier as well, that, I mean, the gambling industry has taken a lot of positive steps forward. But for every like of these positive steps, there is like one negative story, and that will like kill the advancements that have been made by the industry. So this is a challenge, I think, for us, all of us. But I think that it's important for all of us, and PAF included, to kind of drive ourselves and the industry and take these kind of initiatives and really, because we need the support and we need the society to believe that we are a sustainable business. That's otherwise we are not good.
Thank you. And what I have seen, because I was very interested to read about this reduction in loss limits down to 20,000 euros a year, starting, as I understand it, from January next year. And PAF is saying that it's shown it's possible to survive as a gaming company without income from the biggest big players. And that is certainly a very big issue here in the UK currently, because at the end of this month, new restrictions come into place with regard to high-value customers. And it will raise the question for many operators here, is their business going to be sustainable? PAF clearly thinks it is. Sandhya, tell us a little bit about Napoleon Sports and Casinos governance framework, and perhaps I can just test you by asking whether or not what we've just heard from Daniela is something that Napoleon Sport and Casino would itself be thinking of in terms of changing its fundamental arrangements in relation to, for instance, loss limits.
Mm-hmm. So Napoleon Sports and Casino, so recently we have been certified on ISO 27K and ISO 9K. So that's a feather in our hat. So it also indicates that we are very strong with our procedures. So definitely we are, we go by the book. Whatever regulation is published, we follow it to the T. Yes, sometimes there are regulations we might not like, but we do follow it, and then we open collaboration with the gaming authority. So that's one of the positive things that we do in Belgium, that apart from having all the governance models in place, like the responsible gaming policies, AML policies, training for the employees, we've also opened channels, or rather the Gaming Commission has also opened channels, where we could present our thoughts, or our ideas and our thoughts and our concerns also with regards to any new laws that are published, or new regulations that are about to be published or have already been published. Now, coming back to Daniela's point, so yeah, I was reading about it when she mentioned about it. So I think in Belgium specifically, we already have a lot of restrictions in place, or I would say very, very good restrictions. For example, Belgium operators cannot accept credit cards. Right? We don't have bonuses in Belgium anymore, so it's zero bonus policy. Then we also have weekly PDL player deposit limits. Plus, now the requirement is, or rather the new approach which is being looked at for 2021 by the Gaming Authority, is that whenever a player requests an increase, they're going to create electronic systems which would check with the National Bank of Belgium whether the player is eligible for an increase, and then accordingly approve the increase. So it's going to be an automated system in 2021. So looking at all these measures, I would say yes, we would not put a blanket loss limit for the customers. However, we definitely are enthusiastic about using data-based analytic tools, which can, and specifically responsible gaming tools. So we've recently signed up with one of the tools, which can help prevent the customer reaching to that deposit limit, reaching to that loss limit. So where we proactively can see, based on the spending of the customer, oh, something is going wrong, let's go and talk to the customer and see what's going on and how we can help them and what are the different tools we can provide to them. So I think a blanket approach might not be suitable for our business, but we would like to see it more from a proactivity point of view, where we can help the customer before he reaches that point of loss.
Thank you. Katie, from your association's perspective, we've seen in recent months, obviously, some fairly fundamental publications with the Code for Socially Responsible Gambling and the Code for Data Protection. And I imagine that EGBA would be saying that these are principles that should be embedded within all European gambling operators' governance frameworks. What further assistance can your association provide, and how does that actually work in practice, bearing in mind collaboration with other industry associations throughout different parts of Europe?
Thank you, David. So, indeed, there are many things that we've been working on for the moment. Already 2 years ago, I remember when I was talking to the European Commission about a certain policy area, and we were discussing what EGBA members are doing. And then I heard the following sentence. Well, Katie, I know your members are doing a really good job, but is the whole of the industry following the same principles as the ones that you're explaining here? And this was already something that got me to thinking back then, well, we should be doing more to consolidate, to help the industry as a trade body kind of behave more responsibly. And our members have been always, I think, at the forefront of kind of being willing to accept restrictions because they see also the kind of the positive and the beneficial outcome for business alongside kind of the ethical side of it. So we have been working, as you said, David, on a code of advertising where we think these are really principles that can be applied in any European country. We've also worked on a code for the industry code of conduct under the GDPR, which is actually a very interesting one because there you can directly see also the benefits of self-regulation because the GDPR has an article which allows for the fact that if you as a company adhere to a code of conduct done by the industry, if you are found in breach of the GDPR, your fine could be reduced by up to 50%. So the gambling industry via EGBA is going to be one of the first industries in Europe to have such a code and to have the possibility for operators to adhere to an industry code. One of the next things which we're going to do is we've started working on guidelines on AML, which are going to deal with how do we perceive a customer is as low risk, medium risk, or high risk? How is this risk going to be assessed? How do we conduct due diligence? How do we conduct enhanced due diligence? What do we accept as acceptable source of proof for source of funds? All kinds of things like this. And this will also tie into the revision of the Anti-Money Laundering Directive in the EU. So what EGBA has tried to do is try to give operators tools, and not just EGBA members, but the wider industry, just to give tools to be able to help them to comply, because ultimately complying with the laws is something that every operator needs to do. But if we want to be able to kind of prevent even stronger rules and that are sometimes coming from legislators, which are very, very strict and kind of can go in the opposite direction, kind of not towards more, they can just lead to over-regulation, which can harm channeling ultimately. So EGBA is trying to give tools to the industry to deal with all of these problems. And one of the other things that we have done is we've set up a network of all the national associations. Well, not all of them in the EU, but most of them. And we're working towards establishing good contacts with the industry associations in the member states to really kind of try to consolidate more cooperation, more discussions on the topic that are really relevant. Because let's say one example, I'll just give one example, the example of advertising. The last 2 years, advertising restrictions have been coming left, right, and center across all jurisdictions in the EU. And what are we doing there? If 2 years ago already, or 3 years ago, we as an industry had said we need to be more responsible in advertising, maybe today there wouldn't be an advertising ban in Italy. So what we are trying to kind of work to be in front. We're trying to preempt things and not just kind of follow regulatory trends. And I think that's one of the main things what we need to do as an industry, and hopefully what EGBA can also help drive.
That's interesting, because preempting and not just following regulation does, of course, raise the question what should one be doing? Should one be doing the bare minimum that is required in the jurisdiction within which a particular operator is operating its business? Or, although we're not going to have harmonization of gambling laws across Europe, that might have been a dream years ago, but clearly that's not going to happen, is there a case in terms of ethical gambling to achieve a harmonization of standards of the type that EGBA is seeking at the moment in gambling advertising and data protection? Meaning that if that is the case, there would be voluntary action by operators that is preempting, to pick up your word, Katie, preempting action that might be taken by a regulator. We've got the forthcoming review of gambling legislation in the UK. I will not be surprised if we don't see something along the lines of loss limits, staking limits, possibly, and many other restrictions that I imagine the regulator in Sweden will be very interested in, the regulator in the Netherlands, still to get their regime up and running, very interested in Spain. I could carry on. So what is the future here? Martin, I'm going to come back to you because this is something that, although this conference is about Europe, it's something that GVC is experiencing in the US, where at the moment, in terms of player protection regulation, not much exists. But I believe through the GVC Foundation, there is a degree of preempting, again, to pick up Katie's word, going on. Can you comment on that?
Sure, and I completely agree with your starting assumption. Indeed, the consumer protection laws and regulations are very much work in progress at the other end of the pond. Having said that, the likes of the American Gaming Association, together or being supported by their members and other operators, have been leading the charge. I reckon what we all need to bear in mind in this regard is that compared in particular to the UK or the US markets are very, very immature. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say that there should be only very light touch consumer protection standards, quite the opposite in particular during the raging pandemic. At the same time, and I suppose that's the point I am trying to make, is that it can't be one size fits all, or it can't be that we would simply replicate the standards that over the years have been evolving in the UK and elsewhere in Europe, and replicate them in the United States. But indeed, the key objective of the GVC Global Foundation, and in this case its sister organization, the GVC Foundation US, is to raise awareness about gambling regulation and in particular responsible gambling and sports integrity related issues in the United States. For that very reason, we have partnered up with a number of highly reputable organizations, and ultimately we are looking for sort of champions, i.e. people that could help us to convey these messages. That it may be borderline okay when a new regulation or a new jurisdiction comes to the regulatory fold to go a little more light touch on some of these standards. Well, most definitely not the likes of anti-money laundering or anti-fraud, but give the market a little bit of time to capture the previously unregulated offer. But once that's done, and you'd like to think that this all could be accomplished in a space of 6 to 12 months, very, very seriously consider how, not whether, but how the existing consumer protection gambling, responsible gambling standards can be strengthened, how they can be ramped up so that the nascent US market spares itself some of the rather tragic lessons the industry has learned the hard way in Europe. So that is, to answer your question, one of the key objectives of the GVC Foundation, which is a flagship CSR project of ours.
That's interesting, because as I indicated in the question, it really, I suppose, is directed at the extent to which newer gambling jurisdictions, online gambling jurisdictions in Europe, can learn from the mistakes, if that's the right way of putting it, in other jurisdictions, to save running into the same sort of problems that, for instance, we're now encountering here in the UK. Now, I'm very conscious of the time. I think we were out of time. So I'm going to draw our questions there, and I hope that those operators who have been listening have learned from your very helpful comments, because I think they have all served to underline how absolutely crucial it is from all operators' perspectives to have a good governance framework in place. And I go back to where I started, set of rules, practices and processes by which companies are governed. But I do know from the work I've been doing, it's areas in which one can learn from the experience of others. And I would very, very strongly recommend any operators who are listening to governance principles during this session for the first time to explore it further with their advisors. Many, many thanks to all of you, Martin, Katie, Daniela and Sandhya. Thank you very much indeed. And so I will now return us to SBC.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.